Salve! Welcome to the crash course for Roman history on the National Latin Exam. I'm Madeline Weiner, your source for approachable Roman history on YouTube. I'm going to try to tell you all the history you need to know for the National Latin Exam as quickly as possible. I love the stories of Roman history, and I'm about to ruin them by not telling them, because you don't need to know the whole story for the National Latin Exam, just a handful of names and places and ideas. So jot down some notes, use this as a super quick review, or as background to approach your practice questions. I've put a link to a guided notes template in the video description below, so teachers or students print that out if you'd like to organize your notes. If you're really interested in Roman history, I go into a lot more detail in my weekly Roman history videos. Go check those out if you're looking for a good beginner history of Rome. This video is just a crash course you can use to fake your way through the exam. I've also got some mythology crash course videos, so watch those next if you haven't already. Let's start by going through the eras. The monarchy goes from 753 to 510 BCE. There were 7 kings of Rome, and they are all legendary. Then there's a republic, which lasts from 509 to 27 BCE. This is a semi-representative form of government, more like an oligarchy than what we think of as a republic. Finally, there's the empire from 27 BCE to 476 CE, or at least that's the fall in the west. The east goes on a lot longer. In the empire period, Rome is ruled by an emperor. It's a return to monarchy, but by another name. Rome was founded by Romulus, but first I need to talk about Aeneas, but first I need to talk about Picus. Picus was the legendary first king of Latium, the region of Italy where Rome would someday be. According to legend, the Titan Saturn hid in Latium for a while after the war between the gods and Titans, before being found by Jupiter and thrown into prison. Picus was Saturn's son. His name means woodpecker, and either he was turned into a woodpecker once, or he could transform into one at will, or he relied on woodpeckers for messages from the gods. Sources are not consistent. But if you see Picus, he's an old king of Latium, and he's associated with woodpeckers. Next, we need to talk about the Trojan War. According to legend, Rome's seeds were laid by Aeneas, the last hero of Troy. Aeneas fled Troy with his father Anchises and his son Ascanius, or Iulus. He has 2 names. They sailed to Italy to found a new city, but were blown off course a few times and ended up in Carthage, where Aeneas fell in love with Dido, and that did not end well. Dido died and said her people, the Carthaginians, would hate the future descendants of Aeneas forever, which foreshadows the wars Rome and Carthage would later fight in real life. Then Aeneas made it to Italy and founded Lavinium. His son Iulus left to found a different city called Alba Longa. And Alba Longa is where Romulus and Remus were from. Romulus and Remus were twin boys. Their grandfather was a king of Alba Longa. Their mother was Rhea Silvia, daughter of the king and a Vestal virgin. Their father was Mars. Their uncle, who was the usurping king, think Lion King, tried to kill them by throwing them into the Tiber River, the river that runs right next to Rome, but they were rescued and nursed by a she-wolf, or lupa in Latin. Then they were raised by a shepherd named Faustulus and his wife Acca Larentia. They argued over where to found Rome. There were 7 hills, and they each wanted a different hill. Romulus killed Remus, and so Rome was founded on the Palatine Hill on April 21st, 753 BCE. If you are in middle school, and this is your first year of Latin, you are probably taking the Introduction to Latin exam. Ask your teacher which exam you're taking if you are in doubt. Most high schoolers don't take this exam. So if you're taking the intro exam, this is where you are probably good to stop watching. Go do some practice problems or something, or keep watching if you're interested. High schoolers and upper levels, keep watching. Romulus kicks off the monarchy period. He's the first of the 7 kings. Here's what you need to know about each of them. Romulus kidnapped the Sabine women. Numa Pompilius focused on peace and on religion, and he had a relationship with a nymph named Egeria, who he said gave him all his good ideas. Tullus Hostilius was all about war, and he expanded the kingdom. Under him were the Horatii and the Curiatii, 2 sets of triplets who battled each other to decide who won a war. Ancus Marcius was Numa's grandson because the Romans wanted to return to peace. He was king of balance, excellent in both war and peace. The 5th king was Tarquinius Priscus, also known as Tarquin I, and he kicks off the cycle of Etruscan kings. The last 3 kings of Rome are not Roman at all. They are Etruscan from Etruria, which is modern-day Tuscany in northern Italy. The first Tarquin is famous for getting his hat stolen by an eagle, predicting he would become king. After him was Servius Tullius, who might have started as a slave. He was destined to become king because when he was a boy his head was on fire in the palace. And then Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. He was the son of the first Tarquin, Tarquinius Priscus. He killed Servius Tullius, his predecessor. He was a very bad man. He was a tyrant, and he was overthrown, ending the monarchy and ending the line of Etruscan kings. This was the beginning of the Republic. Brutus and Collatinus were the ones who overthrew Tarquin the Proud. That was as a result of Tarquin's son attacking Lucretia, the wife of Collatinus. Brutus and Collatinus were named the first consuls, leaders of the new republic. There was war with Tarquin, who was still alive, and with an ally of his, Lars Porsena, who was king of Etruria. You need to know some heroes in that war. You had Horatius Cocles, who defended the bridge over the Tiber River single-handedly. You had Mucius Scaevola, who went face-to-face with Lars Porsena in his tent and burned off his own right hand in a show of strength. And you had Cloelia, a young girl who swam across the Tiber River in order to save herself and other hostages. When the war ended, the Republic officially started, so we need to go over the offices of the Republic. The consul was the chief magistrate, much like a president. There were 2 consuls at a time, and they were limited to a 1-year term. There were many praetors at a time, and a praetor was more like a vice president. There was the aedile, who was in charge of public works, things like roads, bridges, baths, water, anything the government keeps up for the benefit of the people. Quaestors were in charge of the law courts. The tribunes of the plebs represented the common people. They had the power of veto. They could block any act of any other magistrate. Dictators were appointed only in times of crisis, and they would take over the job of both consuls. This was the only time the Republic would have one-man rule. The censor was the taker of the census, so there were only censors every 5 years. The census decided what taxes you paid and what social class you belonged to, so the censors were very powerful, and were usually selected from the group of former consuls. Then you had the senators, who were an advisory council to the consul. They started as a select group and eventually expanded to everyone who had ever held any of the other offices, so they became a very large body under the Republic. They often had little to no actual power, but they had enormous influence. Some other terms to know from the Republic period. A fasces is an axe head in a bundle of rods, and it's a symbol of absolute power. Also, the conflict of the orders was a fight between patricians, who were the wealthy elite, and plebeians, who were the common people. The patricians held all the power at the beginning of the Republic. Throughout the early Republic, plebeians made gradual gains, until finally certain plebeian families were equal to the original patricians in political power. As a result of the conflict of the orders, politicians tended to fall into one of 2 factions. They tended to be either populares or optimates. Populares were politicians who appealed to the common people, and optimates appealed to the established structures of power. They appealed to the existing oligarchy. One more important name to know from the early Republic: Cincinnatus, the model dictator. I told you about the dictator, who was appointed to take charge if there was an emergency when the consuls were unavailable. Cincinnatus had been a great general, but had gone home to become a farmer, and the Senate pulled him out of retirement to fight a war. He was appointed dictator for 6 months. He won the war, came home, made some necessary reforms, handed back power, and went back home to his plow, all within 16 days. That's all the history for the beginning Latin exam. If you were in High School Latin 1 or Year 2 of a middle school program, that will probably be you. Latin 2 and above, keep watching. Under the Republic, we've got some important wars to talk about. In 390 BCE was the invasion of the Gauls. The Gauls were fierce warriors in modern-day France, and they captured the city of Rome. They besieged the Romans on the Capitoline Hill, which was the most fortified point in Rome. At one point, the sacred geese of Juno saved the city by warning the Romans of the invading Gauls. But the Romans couldn't defeat the Gauls, so they decided to buy the peace with 1,000 pounds of gold. The Gallic commander, Brennus, had the famous quote, "Vae victis," or "Woe to the conquered," which is an ancient way of saying, "Sucks to be you." But a great former general named Camillus, who had been exiled earlier for political reasons, swooped in with an army and saved Rome from actually having to pay the ransom. Camillus defeated the Gauls, but they still destroyed the city. Rome had been conquering a lot of land in Italy for the last few centuries, and this was a huge setback. The Romans continued to fear the Gauls until the days of Caesar. The Samnite Wars were 3 wars between 343 and 290 BCE, between Rome and the Samnite people, a southern Italian people who were the last major group of Italians the Romans needed to conquer before they ruled the whole peninsula. The Samnites were a tough enemy. In the Second Samnite War, they trapped the Romans in a canyon in the Battle of Caledine Forks. They decided not to slaughter the army, but they made the Romans pass under a symbolic yoke to represent the shame of their defeat. Though this battle was a major Samnite victory, the Romans came back to win the wars. During the Samnite Wars was a famous censor named Appius Claudius Caecus, who was a builder. He built the first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia. But during the Samnite Wars, he built the Via Appia, a long road across the Italian peninsula that could quickly move Roman troops to Samnite territory. The Via Appia was a technical marvel of its time. It was called the Regina Viarum, or Queen of Roads. It was also a message. Rome was going to rule the Samnites forever. The Pyrrhic War was from 280 to 275 BCE. Once Rome had conquered all the Italians, they had to deal with the Greeks who lived in the south of Italy, which was called Magna Graecia. This meant fighting a great Greek general from the mainland, Pyrrhus, Rome's first major foreign enemy. Pyrrhus brought an army to Italy that included war elephants, the first time Romans had ever faced elephants in battle. Pyrrhus won a lot of early battles, but he lost so many troops in them that he might as well have lost them, leading to the term Pyrrhic victory, a victory not worth the cost. The Roman strength was just continuously supplying more and more troops, until Pyrrhus, who was fighting on enemy territory, had to relent and run back to Greece. The Punic Wars were 3 wars that stretched from 246 to 146 BCE. Once they had beaten Pyrrhus and taken all of Italy, the next step was for Rome to challenge the dominant power of the Mediterranean, which was Carthage in North Africa. The First Punic War was mostly a naval conflict. When Rome won, it took its first province outside Italy, the island of Sicily. The Second Punic War is the big famous one that featured the general Hannibal, not to be confused with the famous cannibal. The Carthaginian general Hannibal had a famous moment sneaking over the Alps, crossing this giant mountain range to catch the Romans unaware. He also famously used elephants in his army, but don't get confused because Pyrrhus was the first. His biggest victories were at Lake Trasimene and Cannae. Cannae was the biggest Roman defeat in their history. It remained a day of mourning for the Romans for centuries. But the Romans wore Hannibal down just as they did Pyrrhus. Finally, Scipio Africanus won the war and beat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama back in Africa. For the Third Punic War, Carthage was really not much of a power anymore, so it was really just a slaughter of the Carthaginians. And Cato the Elder was a Roman figure at the time who was famous for ending every speech, no matter what the subject, with Carthago delenda est, which means Carthage must be destroyed. Back on the home front, we have the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. They were populares and they tried to give land to plebeians, but they were murdered by the powerful Optimates. Spartacus was an escaped Thracian gladiator who led a slave revolt, and he almost succeeded, but Pompey and Crassus defeated him. More on Pompey and Crassus in a couple of slides. And in the dwindling days of the Republic, we get Cicero. Cicero was the best lawyer and public speaker of his time, possibly of all time. He started as a novus homo, someone whose family had never been in politics before, but he rose quickly to become consul. He was named the Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland, for saving Rome from a conspiracy by a populist named Catiline. Cicero was an Optimate. Later, Cicero clashed extensively with another populist named Clodius Pulcher. Clodius was an aristocrat, a descendant of Appius Claudius, who built the Via Appia, but he got himself named tribune of the plebs and became a maestro of mob violence. Cicero tried to take Clodius down, but Clodius remained powerful and got Cicero exiled for a while. Clodius died how he lived, mob violence. But in the meantime, a group of warlords had been pulling the Republic toward autocracy. Gaius Marius was a powerful general who reformed the army. He became absurdly powerful and was consul 7 times. He showed the way to dominance of Rome, a personal army, soldiers loyal to a single person rather than to the state. Sulla was a rival of Marius's who came to eclipse him. After Marius's death, Sulla marched his army on Rome and stole power as dictator. He took Rome by military force and had himself declared dictator. Sulla had a reign of terror based on proscriptions, lists of people he wanted dead, so anyone could collect a reward for killing them. After Sulla's death came the Triumvirate, an alliance of 3 powerful men, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar, who came together to rule Rome through illegal means. Crassus died in a military defeat in Parthia, leaving just Caesar and Pompey, who then turned on each other. Their conflict would bring an end to the Republic. Caesar had been leading an army conquering Gaul, ending the long-standing Roman fears of the Gauls. His biggest threat was the Gallic general Vercingetorix, but he defeated him. He also tried to take parts of Britain and Germany. But then Caesar began to feud with Pompey. Pompey used to be Caesar's son-in-law because he married his daughter to cement the alliance, but Julia died, and Pompey considered the alliance broken. Pompey declared Caesar's war illegal and ordered him to come back to Rome for trial. In 49 BCE, Caesar marched on Rome just like Sulla had before him, and took it back from Pompey by force. The famous quote of this occasion is alia jacta est, the die has been cast, which Caesar said when he was crossing the Rubicon River. The Rubicon River was the border between Rome and Gaul, so when he crossed that with his army, he was officially making civil war on Rome. So both alia jacta est and crossing the Rubicon are famous phrases meaning that there's no going back now. In 48 BCE, Caesar defeated Pompey at Pharsalus, which is a town in Greece, and was declared Dictator Perpetuus, dictator forever. Caesar then traveled to Egypt for a while to take care of the rest of the opposition, and there Caesar and Queen Cleopatra became lovers and allies. On March 15th, or the Ides of March 44 BCE, Caesar was stabbed by senators, including Brutus, a descendant of the Brutus who exiled the last king of Rome centuries earlier. After Caesar's death, the second triumvirate formed, which was Octavian, who was the heir of Caesar and his great-nephew, Marcus Antonius, or Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man, and Lepidus, who doesn't matter. The second triumvirate brought back proscription lists, and Cicero was killed because he had made speeches against Mark Antony. The triumvirate defeated Caesar's assassins at Philippi, then turned on each other. Antony went to Egypt and became Cleopatra's second lover and ally. Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. Actium was a naval battle near Greece in 31 BCE, and it's a major turning point. Rome took Egypt as a province because of the death of Cleopatra, its last queen, and Octavian was declared Augustus, the first emperor, in 27 BCE. If you are in Latin 2 taking the intermediate exam, you are probably safe to stop here. Again, ask your teacher if you're not sure which exam you're taking, or just keep going with the upper levels. There isn't much more to go. And upper levels, which means intermediate reading comp and all the advanced exams, stick with me until the end. For the empire, we start with the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which is 27 BCE to 68 CE. Augustus, formerly Octavian, started the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. This was an era of internal peace, meaning no civil wars and relative government stability during this time. Augustus had a wife and advisor named Livia, a military advisor named Agrippa, and a cultural advisor named Maecenas. He had to exile his daughter Julia and the great poet Ovid over his new adultery laws, probably not in the same incident. And he famously said, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble." Humble guy. His heir, Tiberius, was like his fourth choice for heir. He was Augustus's stepson, the son of Livia by a previous marriage. As emperor, Tiberius was mediocre. He retired to an island halfway through his reign and never came back to Rome, though he remained emperor until his death. Caligula was a power-mad tyrant. He famously made his horse Incitatus a senator. Claudius was seen as weak and controlled by others, but he did conquer Britain. He was poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son from a previous marriage, Nero, to be emperor. Nero was horrible, and you will often be asked about the Great Fire of 64 CE that happened under his watch. Nero built a palace called the Domus Aurea in the ruins of the Great Fire, then blamed the Christians for the fire and persecuted them. Nero also spent some time trying to kill his mother Agrippina with various shenanigans. The next dynasty was the Flavians, who lasted from 69 to 96 CE. This was after a bloody civil war called the Year of the Four Emperors. Vespasian was the winner, and he was the father of both the other eventual Flavian emperors, first Titus and then Domitian. Titus died of an illness after less than 2 years on the throne, and died without an heir, so his younger brother Domitian took over. The Flavians built the Colosseum, which is also called the Flavian Amphitheater. Vespasian started it, Titus opened it. The Flavians harshly put down a Jewish rebellion and destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem. And in 79 CE, during Titus's reign, Pompeii and Herculaneum were destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. Domitian was assassinated, and after him were the 5 good emperors, from 96 to 192 CE. They started with Nerva, an elderly senator who changed everything by adopting a worthy adult successor instead of a close family member. This was Trajan, who became known as a military emperor. He had the largest size of the empire under him, and so we remember Trajan as having the biggest pecs and the biggest empire. Hadrian was a lover of Greece, art, architecture, and beards. He brought back the beard. He established Hadrian's Wall as the northern border of Roman Britain. Then you had Antoninus Pius, who was a caretaker emperor, and Marcus Aurelius, who was known as the philosopher emperor. Marcus Aurelius left the throne to his son Commodus, who thought of himself as a gladiator, and threw out all the stability of the century before him. He was awful. After this, you can lose the continuous narrative, because there's a bunch of emperors no one ever focuses on, even though they're fascinating. In the later empire, you need to know Diocletian, who divided the empire into the eastern and western sides in 286 CE. You also need to know Constantine, who ruled from 306 to 337 CE. He was the first Christian emperor, so sort of changed everything. Before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine had a vision of the Christian Chi-Rho symbol and the phrase, "In this sign you will conquer," or "In hoc signo vinces." So he converted. Constantine also founded Constantinople as an eastern capital for the empire. 476 CE was the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but the Eastern Roman Empire went all the way until the fall of Constantinople in 1453 CE, so another 1,000 years. And that's the quick version of all the history you need for the National Latin exam. Remember to take a look at my weekly Roman history videos if you're interested in going deeper and learning the full stories. And don't forget to go watch the mythology crash course videos too. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at MaddieWay, and check out my books in both English and Latin. Study well and good luck on your National Latin exam.